Being the new kid in school sucks. You probably know how it goes. Walking into a cafeteria full of faces you don't recognize, trying to figure out where to sit without looking like a total loser. I've always been awkward with people, and making friends wasn't my strong suit. So, when this kid, Daniel, invited me to sit with him at lunch on my third day, I was relieved. He wasn't exactly normal, but hey, neither was I. He had this weird, sarcastic sense of humor, always making jokes that felt a little too dark, a little too twisted, but I just went with it. At least I wasn't eating alone anymore. Daniel wasn't popular, not by a long shot. He was more of a loner, which probably explained why he reached out to me in the first place. I didn't mind. We both kind of stayed under the radar, and after a while it became routine. Lunch together, sometimes we'd hang out after school. I wouldn't say we were friends exactly, but it was better than nothing. Still, something about him always felt off. It wasn't just the dark humor. Lots of kids joke around like that. It was the way he looked at people, like he was watching them through a one-way mirror. Like he was sizing them up for something. But I ignored it. I didn't have a lot of options. One day, after lunch, Daniel asked if I wanted to come over to his house after school. He said his parents wouldn't be home, which seemed like a bonus to me. Who likes hanging out with parents hovering around? His house was about a 15-minute walk from school, tucked away on the edge of town in this neighborhood I'd never really noticed before. The place looked old, run down in a way that gave me a weird feeling, but I pushed it aside. I figured maybe his family was just going through hard times or something. The front yard was overgrown, the paint on the house peeling, and a couple of windows were cracked. "Come on," he said, waving me toward the door like it was no big deal. Inside wasn't much better. The air smelled musty, like it hadn't been aired out in a long time. The floors creaked with every step, and there were random piles of junk, boxes, old furniture, scattered everywhere. It wasn't dirty exactly, just cluttered, like they never threw anything away. I tried not to stare too much, didn't want to seem rude. We went up to his room, and for a while everything was normal. We played some video games, shot the breeze, and Daniel seemed, well, normal enough. Maybe a little quiet, but I figured that was just how he was. We both weren't exactly chatty types, so the silence didn't bother me. But then, about an hour in, things started to get weird. Out of nowhere, Daniel paused the game and just stared at the screen. I thought maybe he was zoning out or something, but after a few seconds, he turned to me with this dead serious look on his face. "You ever think about how easy it is to hurt someone?" he asked. I laughed, hoping it was just another one of his weird jokes, but he wasn't laughing. He wasn't even smiling. His eyes had this strange, intense look, like he was waiting for me to say something. I didn't know what to do, so I just shrugged it off, trying to play it cool. I guess. I mean, what are you talking about?" Instead of answering, he stood up and motioned for me to follow him. "Come on, I want to show you something." Something in my gut told me to just leave, to say I had homework or something and get the hell out of there. But for some stupid reason, I followed him. Maybe I didn't want to seem like a wuss. Maybe I was just too curious for my own good. He led me to the basement door. It was this old wooden thing with rusty hinges that creaked like in some horror movie when he opened it. The basement was dark, really dark, and I could smell something foul coming from down there. It was like mold, mixed with something else. Something metallic. "After you," Daniel said, holding the door open. I hesitated for a second, but then I stepped inside. The stairs creaked under my feet, and the deeper we went, the colder it got. My heart was pounding, but I tried to play it off, like I was fine. When we reached the bottom, Daniel flicked on a single dim light bulb that swung from the ceiling, casting creepy shadows on the walls. The basement was cluttered, even worse than the rest of the house. There were old tools, broken furniture, and stacks of newspapers that looked like they'd been sitting there for decades. But what really caught my attention was the smell. It was stronger down here. Sour and sharp, like something rotting. Daniel walked over to a rusty metal cabinet in the corner and started rummaging through it. I stood there, feeling like I should leave, but not sure how to without making things awkward. Then, he pulled out this big kitchen knife, the kind you see chefs use on TV to chop meat. It gleamed under the weak light, and for a second, I thought I was imagining things. He turned to me, holding the knife loosely in his hand, and smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was tight, forced, like he was trying to hold back a laugh. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said, his voice calm. "Unless you make me." I felt my blood run cold. My legs wanted to move, to run up those stairs and get out of there. But I was frozen in place. Like, my brain couldn't process what was happening fast enough. Daniel stepped closer, still holding the knife, his eyes locked on mine. "Relax," he said, his voice soft now, almost whispering. "I'm just messing with you." But he wasn't. I could see it in his eyes. I tried to laugh, to play it cool, but it came out all wrong, shaky, nervous. "Yeah, man, you got me. Good one," I said, slowly edging toward the stairs, trying not to let him see how scared I really was. Daniel didn't move at first, just stood there with the knife hanging at his side, watching me. Then, just as I thought I was in the clear, he stepped in front of the stairs, blocking my way. "What's the rush?" he asked, tilting his head like he was genuinely curious. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My heart was racing, and every instinct was screaming at me to get out of there. But how? He had a knife, and I was trapped in this creepy basement with no one else around. My parents didn't even know where I was. I hadn't told them I was going to Daniel's house. They just assumed I was hanging out with someone normal. I swallowed hard and forced myself to keep calm. I just remembered I have to be home soon," I said, trying to sound casual. "My mom's gonna freak if I'm late." Daniel's face stayed blank for a second, then he smiled again. This time, it was wider, more unsettling. He twirled the knife in his hand and stepped aside, letting me pass. "Sure," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "Wouldn't want you to get in trouble." I didn't waste any time. As soon as I was past him, I bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time. I could hear him laughing behind me, this low, creepy chuckle that echoed in the dark basement. When I reached the front door, I yanked it open and sprinted down the street without looking back. I didn't stop running until I was halfway home. My legs felt like jelly, and my chest was burning, but I didn't care. I just needed to get as far away from Daniel as possible. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying everything that had happened in my head, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Daniel really was just messing with me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The look in his eyes when he held that knife, it wasn't a joke. He wasn't playing around. The next day at school, Daniel wasn't there. I kept looking for him, half expecting him to show up at lunch with that same creepy smile, but he never did. In fact, I never saw him again. He just disappeared, like he'd never existed. I never told anyone about what happened, not my parents, not the school, not even the few kids I eventually made friends with. It seemed easier to just forget about it, but I never really did. Every now and then, I'll think about Daniel. Wonder what happened to him, where he went if he ever pulled that same stunt on someone else, and if they got away. It's been years since all this went down, but I still get chills when I think about it. I never thought about it much before, but it's strange how certain memories stick with you. The ones you don't want to remember. The ones you tell yourself don't matter. They're the ones that linger the longest, like shadows you can't shake. It's been years since high school, but there's one memory that claws its way back into my mind more often than I'd like to admit. Maybe it's guilt, or maybe it's something darker, something I try to pretend doesn't exist. But lately, I can't help but think that some things, some people, you can't escape forever. I wasn't a bad kid, you know? Not really. I mean, none of us were. We were just, dumb. Teenagers. There was a group of us. Me, Darren, Josh, and Ryan. We weren't popular, not by a long shot, but we weren't outcasts either. We were just the regular guys who drifted around the edges, doing our thing, not making much of a mark. But there was this one kid. We called him Mouse. His real name was Ian, but we barely ever used it. Mouse suited him better. He was this small, quiet guy who never seemed to fight back. Easy target. I guess that's where it all started. Harmless teasing, or at least it felt harmless at the time. Looking back, it doesn't seem so harmless anymore. We never really did anything extreme, or at least that's what I kept telling myself for years. No beatings, no serious pranks, just stupid kid stuff. Name-calling, shoving him in the hallway sometimes, or making him the butt of a joke. Darren, the loudmouth of the group, would lead most of it. And we'd all laugh along because it was easier than standing up for Ian. Besides, Ian never stood up for himself, so we figured it didn't bother him. At least, that's what I thought. Now, thinking back on it, I realize how wrong we were. It's like we'd created this narrative in our heads that made it all okay. Ian never said a word, never fought back, so he must have been fine, right? But there were signs. I just didn't see them, or maybe I didn't want to. One night, a few weeks after graduation, I got a text from Darren. It was normal enough. "Hey, meet me at the park, the one by the old playground. Got something to show you. Nothing weird about it." We hung out at that park all the time, especially after dark when it was quiet and no one was around to bother us. So I didn't think twice about it. I grabbed my jacket, threw on my sneakers, and headed out. When I got to the park, it was different. The whole place felt wrong, like something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The air was thick, and not in the humid way, but like something heavy was pressing down on everything. The playground, which was usually a place we joked around in, stood empty and silent. It was so quiet I could hear my own breathing, and I remember thinking it was strange that Darren wasn't there yet. He was always the first to show up. I checked my phone again, thinking maybe I'd misread the message or gotten the time wrong. Nope, it was clear. Be there at 9. It was already a little past that. I waited another 10 minutes, pacing around, feeling more and more uneasy. Something about the way the swings creaked in the breeze made my skin crawl. But I stayed, telling myself it was just my imagination. Then, out of nowhere, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, expecting to see Darren walking up, grinning like an idiot for making me wait. But it wasn't Darren. It was Ian. I hadn't seen him in years, not since high school. He looked different, but not in the way I expected. He was taller, sure, and not as scrawny as he used to be, but there was something else, something unsettling about him. His eyes, those same dark, quiet eyes, looked colder, emptier. His face was pale, his expression flat, like he was barely holding something back. And he wasn't smiling. He just stood there for a moment, staring at me, and that's when I noticed he had a phone in his hand. Darren's phone. The one he'd used to text me. I felt this wave of cold realization wash over me. Ian didn't say anything at first, and I didn't know what to do. I just stood there, frozen, waiting for him to make the first move. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was so calm, so eerily calm, it made my stomach churn. "You remember me, don't you?" Of course I did, but for a second I didn't know what to say. I could feel my throat tighten, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. "Ian, "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away. He just kept looking at me, his expression unreadable. Then he took a step closer. "You and your friends. You ruined my life." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to deny it, to tell him we didn't mean anything by it, that it was just kids being kids. But the look on his face told me he wouldn't believe that. And honestly, at that moment, I didn't believe it either. "We never meant to," I started, but he cut me off. "You think I don't know that?" His voice was still calm, almost emotionless, but there was something under the surface, something boiling just beneath the surface of that calmness. "You think I don't know that you thought it was just a joke? Harmless fun?" He took another step forward, and I instinctively took a step back. But it wasn't a joke to me. I could feel the panic rising in my chest. "Ian, man, look, I'm sorry. We were kids. We didn't know what we were doing." His eyes narrowed slightly and I could see his jaw clench. "Do you know what it feels like to be invisible? To be nothing?" He shook his head, his voice still disturbingly calm. "Every day I went home feeling like nothing, like I didn't exist. And that was because of you." I opened my mouth to say something, anything to defuse the situation. But before I could, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something shiny. At first, I didn't register what it was, but then the light from the lamppost glinted off the blade, and I realized he was holding a knife. My heart stopped. "Ian, what the hell are you doing?" He took another step toward me, his expression still eerily calm. "You took everything from me. Now I'm going to take something from you." I didn't wait for him to explain what he meant. Instinct took over, and I bolted. I turned and ran as fast as I could, my legs burning, my lungs screaming for air. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just heard the sound of his footsteps behind me, faster and faster, and I knew he was chasing me. The park was a maze of trees and paths, and in the darkness, everything looked the same. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how this had happened, how Ian had gone from that quiet, awkward kid to whatever this was. I could still hear him behind me, his footsteps getting closer. My chest tightened with fear and I pushed myself harder, forcing my legs to move even though they felt like they were about to give out. I didn't have time to think, didn't have time to process anything except the pure, primal instinct to survive. Suddenly I tripped over something, a rock or a root, I don't even know, and I hit the ground hard. Pain shot up my leg, and for a moment I thought I might have broken something, but there was no time to check. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and glanced behind me. Ian was gone. I looked around frantically, trying to figure out where he went, but the park was empty, eerily still. The only sound was the blood pounding in my ears. I didn't know if he'd given up or if he was just waiting for me to make a mistake. Either way, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I limped out of the park as fast as I could, my heart still racing. I made it home, locked every door and window, and sat there in the dark, waiting, listening for any sign that he might have followed me. He never came. Even though this happened a few years ago, and I've never been able to forget it. I never saw Ian again after that night. Darren and the others never heard from him either. It was like he just disappeared. But sometimes, late at night, I think about him, about what happened in that park, and I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching, waiting. And I can't help but wonder if one day he'll come back to finish what he started. If you enjoyed this story, you might want to check out our other videos and maybe consider subscribing. It really means a lot to the channel and helps us build a real community of horror lovers like you.